One of the most difficult things for us to talk about in this world is death. But we as Christians do not shy away from talking about death. And death is part of the fabric of our life together. It's part of the fabric of our faith. It's the cornerstone of who we are. And so we do not shy away from talking about death as Christians, particularly at a time like this, where we see the direct effects of disease leading us to death. People have died, people are dying, and people will continue to die. These are facts that we should not shy away from. And they are the reason that it is all the more important for us to speak about death. Now, death is something that affects us all in different ways. We all have different understandings of what that is. That comes from our various experiences and the various deaths that we have faced in our own lives. And so it's difficult to say exactly what death is. And it's certainly something that we cannot say that death affects each and every one of us in one particular way. However, it is helpful for us to see what it is that Scripture has to say about death. We've certainly gotten a lot of that in our readings today. Death is very much at the forefront in everything that we have read. Death is at the forefront of our celebration of Lent. In fact, we begin these 40 days, plus the 6 Sundays, with an understanding of our mortality and a coming to accept that message. However, to really understand where it is that God is in the midst of all of this, to understand where God is in the midst of our understanding and our experience of death, the best place we can go to is our gospel reading for today, from John chapter 11, verses 1 through 45. In this passage, we see the death of Lazarus. We see that it is a death that is unavoidable, that death will come to all. No matter how much we hope that Jesus will come in to heal us, death does come eventually. But we also see where Jesus, the Son of God, God himself in human form, is affected by death. Jesus is affected by death in the way that many of us are affected by death as well. We have many thoughts and feelings and emotions. Jesus has those thoughts and feelings and emotions as well. We're told in this passage that Jesus was greatly disturbed in spirit and deeply moved. There are some scholars who look at these words here and they see the similarities in the same words that are used when Jesus is angry. So whether it is that we are disturbed by death, whether it is that we are upset in any way, whether it is that we are even angry because the effect that death has on us and has in this world, Jesus is there with us. And Jesus is feeling the exact same way with us. Many of us mourn and mourn greatly at the death of our loved ones. And in those famous 2 words, extended a little bit in our translation this morning, but in that famous shortest passage in Scripture, Jesus wept. We hear in those words that when we mourn, that when we are sad by death, God, Jesus, is there with us feeling those exact same emotions with us. And again, death is inescapable. It's a fact of life. That's something that we see in this passage, where everybody tells Jesus that he could have healed Lazarus had he been there, that healing would only be temporary. Death does come to us all. It is a fact of life. It is the fact that we see through this passage. However, at the same time, there is great hope. Because even though Lazarus does die, even though Lazarus has been dead even for 4 days, Jesus still comes. Jesus still raises Lazarus from the dead. Jesus shows us that death does not have the final word for us. Even though we all face it, it is not the end of things. It's also important to note that in the story of John's Gospel, this is one of the last miracle that Jesus performs before going to Jerusalem. It's the very miracle that the Sanhedrin, the ruling body, uses to say that they wish to put Jesus to death. It's what instigates the trial of Jesus and what leads to his eventual crucifixion. It makes a lot of sense that this miracle would be the one that would be the final straw for the leaders, for the Sanhedrin. Because this act, this miracle, this resurrection that Jesus performs, this sums up everything that Jesus has done before, all his teachings, all his healings. And it sums up our faith as well. I'd also like to note, too, that some scholars are quick to point out that Jesus, in this passage, we hear loves Lazarus, that Lazarus is a beloved of Jesus. The scholars are also quick to point out that that term, beloved, refers to another group of people. It refers to us. It refers to us as Christians. So when Jesus is showing this act of love to Lazarus, what he's really doing is giving us a sign of his love for us as well. The raising of Lazarus isn't just about him. It's about us as well. Now, many of you, like me, have experienced death in many forms. And many of you will have seen different reactions to death. You'll have seen some who are prayed over and who recover. You'll have seen some who have been prayed over and do not. Like me, you'll have seen some who have gone quickly and have been relieved from their pain in dying. Whereas you may have seen others who held on for the sake of their loved ones in spite of great and bitter pain. Why these things happen to some and not to others is not something that I can answer. But what I can say is what we hear in this passage of Scripture today. That in death, God is there with us. God is there with us in everything that we feel and everything that we experience. And we know that because he is here and now in this passage with us in death. Jesus is there with us in this experience. Jesus continues to be there with us. We have that comfort that no matter what happens, that no matter what we face, Jesus will be there with us in those experiences. And what I can also say is what we take away finally from this passage, the hope. The hope that death does not have the final word. We do not know what this life after death will entail. We do know that it will be something similar to what is now. We know there will be some physicality to it. We know that from our teaching in the creeds. We know that through our teaching of Scripture, that both Jesus and Lazarus come back in a physical form. We also know from Jesus specifically that transformation, that resurrection, is a complete and new life. It is different completely from what we have known before. So, death is a hardship that we all face in this world. But there is hope in it. Even though death may be something where we mourn and are sad, for even Jesus wept at the death of Lazarus. There is hope that death does not have the final word. Not now, not ever.